So what if I told you that you have access to unlimited innovations and patents in nature, and that you have access to $100 trillion worth of free ecosystem services, and that in addition to all the global human talent that you have access to, you also have access to more than 8 million species of non-human talent. And that could be species that you partner with as data scientists, as musicians, as engineers. Would you start to rethink your business models or rethink how you design cities and communities? Would you think differently about how you create art and music? Or maybe you just think, she's a little crazy. So, would it make you see nature differently if you could collaborate with nature and not just see nature as something to protect or something weak that is to be preserved? In the sustainability space, a lot of the questions that we tend to ask are around how do we protect nature? How do we conserve natural resources? How do we prevent waste? How do we bridge this $2.5 trillion investment gap that's needed to achieve the sustainable development goals by 2030? And sometimes that can be a little daunting. But what if instead of looking at public-private partnerships and how we can protect nature, maybe nature doesn't just need our protection, maybe nature needs our collaboration, and maybe we need to move from public-private partnerships to public-planet partnerships. Now, I have to confess, I didn't always think like this, because certainly at school, I was more of an artist than someone who was into the environment. And even when I started working in development, I was much more interested in human and social development than I was in environmental development. But somewhere along the way, through the work that I did, and the more I got to know nature and interact with it in a completely different way, the more I was just mind blown by how awesome, and we use the word awesome so much that it's almost lost its meaning, but how awesome nature really is. And so it almost activated this inner nature nerd in me that I hope in the very brief time that I have with you, I will help kind of give you permission to unleash your inner nature nerd as well. So in this kind of alternate future or reality that I see, we have moved beyond an age of international relations, and we've moved into interspecies relations that even helps us to preserve peace and human well-being. We go to the Ministry of Commerce and we're starting businesses not just with nature as a stakeholder, but as a shareholder on our memorandum of association. And we're thinking to ourselves, we don't just need human rights, we also need nature's rights. And in the same way that we realize that we're better as humanity when we don't exploit human beings for slavery or sweatshops, we realize that actually we're better off when we integrate nature and we're environmentally inclusive. And this might sound a little far-fetched and out there, but I'm pretty sure that by 2050, even by 2030, that future will be here, because that future is actually a reality. And I'm going to share just a few, and we're barely scratching the surface, but I'm going to share just a few examples of what we define as public-planet partnerships. So, I'm sure you all know that we have a bit of a problem with bees. They're dying at alarming rates. And that's a problem because we rely on bees for global food security. Without pollination, we don't have food, and millions of other species don't have food. So there's this company called Biodiversity that thought, how can we preserve bees? How do we get data on what's actually harming bees so that we can help companies that rely on a lot of natural resources for their products, and also governments make better decisions and environmental practices and policies that will help us save the bees. And just to think about how to get that sheer amount of data, the founder had this brilliant idea. Why not partner with the bees to collect the data? Because beehives are actually a gold mine of data. So every time a bee visits a flower, it collects all of this data that it brings back to the hive on the types of flowers it visited, the levels of pesticides and toxicity and heavy metals. So just to kind of give you a scale of reference, one bee in a year can collect 4 billion data points, and it produces honey. And it can cover an area that is the size of 700 football fields. So for humans to replicate that is completely incomparable. Another problem that we have, that you probably have heard of, is that by 2050, we might have more plastic than fish in the oceans. So a Dutch inventor, who was only 18 at the time, had this idea. Why not partner with the ocean to clean itself? Ocean waves and ocean currents actually naturally move debris into what are called these big ocean garbage patches or vortexes. So all of the debris and plastic kind of gathers in these huge, huge areas. So he built an artificial coastline. So they designed this artificial coastline that is environmentally friendly. It's not just surface level, it also goes into the water, and it helps to harvest and collect all of this garbage. And then they send out a ship that's kind of like a garbage truck to collect it all from one place. And then there's trees. I am a huge fan of trees. So I'm going to read you a quote that I love by the crypto-naturalist, and it goes like this. If you write out the basic facts of trees, but framed as technology, it sounds like impossible sci-fi nonsense. Self-replicating, solar-powered machines that synthesize carbon dioxide and rainwater into oxygen and sturdy building materials on a planetary scale. When we start to think of nature as technology, we really start to appreciate not just artificial intelligence, but also biological intelligence. And the other thing I love about trees is they are amazing therapists. And I don't mean that in the sense of you can talk to a tree and tell it your problems and you'll feel better, although that might be therapeutic. But trees actually prevent a lot of diseases. So by having trees, because they purify the air, they actually reduce the incidence of respiratory diseases like asthma. And access to green spaces encourages physical activity. So communities and neighborhoods that have access to green spaces have lower rates of diabetes and obesity, and even stress and anxiety. Schools and universities that have access to green spaces have higher performance. And even just having a view of a tree from your hospital window has been shown to increase patient recovery rates. And so already governments like the UK's National Health Service have a forest division that is basically mandated to help create green spaces and measures the benefits of that for the economy. So they've estimated that they will save the government over £2 billion in healthcare costs in 1 year, just by partnering with trees. And because we're in the Gulf and in Kuwait and in Bahrain, where I'm from, we love our real estate. Investors love real estate. So I will also benefit that one of the amazing values of trees, and there are so many, is they did a study in California where they measured the value of California's 7 million trees. And about $800 million of the value came because trees boosted real estate value. They increased property value. This is actually one of my favorites. So we don't normally think of rats as being partners in peacekeeping, and certainly not in health. You wouldn't expect to have a rat in a medical laboratory. But this company in Africa called Apopo partners with these African giant pouched rats that have a sense of smell that rivals dogs. And what they do is, there's around 60 countries in the world that still have landmines. So when you have landmines, it prevents communities in post-conflict from actually building on the land, farming. It impedes a lot of their development. So these rats are only 1 kilogram. They're too light to set off the landmines, and they can detect and scan an area that's 200 square meters in 20 minutes. It takes humans with a metal detector 5 days. And not only that, these rats have such an amazing sense of smell that they've also started using them in medical laboratories to test for tuberculosis. So a rat can sniff 100 human samples to see if they have TB, whereas it takes a human technician in a lab 4 days. It's pretty amazing. So these are just a few of the examples I've shared, and what I'm starting to try and get you to see is to relate to nature in a completely different way. And I think, how many of you in this room would consider themselves global citizens? So you've probably lived in other cultures, you've maybe gone to school elsewhere, you feel, yes, I might be Arab or Muslim, but you also kind of feel that you belong everywhere and nowhere. And what I've kind of come to learn with my relationship with nature is I've started to feel not just like a global citizen, but actually part of an interspecies family. So I'm not saying we should abandon technology, and I know, like a lot of you in this room, I was personally floored by the presentation we just saw, and I'm still kind of digesting. But I'm saying that technology can help us amplify biological intelligence. We shouldn't forget the basics that we already have. And I'm going to share a quick video of an example of how technology has amplified a relationship or a collaboration with nature in London. I can't get the video to play.
Air pollution kills nearly 7 million people a year globally, including 10,000 just in London. But because it's scientifically complicated and largely invisible, most people don't realise just how serious the issue is. So Plume Labs, an environmental technology company, set out on a mission to save city dwellers from air pollution by making it impossible to ignore. Introducing the Pigeon Air Patrol, the world's first flock of pigeons who fly around London monitoring air quality in real time on Twitter. 10 pigeons were fitted with custom-made backpacks that measure nitrogen dioxide, ozone and volatile compounds. Each day in rush hour, when air pollution is at its most deadly, the pigeons were released from various locations around London. Going where no bike, car or drone can go, they flew across the city, quickly gathering pollution data. Anyone tweeting their location at Pigeon Air got an instant update on air pollution in their area from the pigeons. With a touch of wit, the Air Patrol brought to life the health risks associated with poor air quality and encouraged people to protect themselves with practical advice from the Plume Air mobile app. Not bad for a pigeon. In 3 days, the Pigeon Air Patrol was featured in more than 2,000 global news stories.
Pigeon.
Pigeon.
Pigeon Air Patrol.
Could give us another way of thinking of pigeons.
Nearly 40,000 conversations online use the hashtag PigeonAir, delivering more than 667 million impressions through PR and social. 93% of those engaged told us they felt differently about pollution now. And we even managed to crowdfund new Plume Labs sensors, which 100 Londoners will beta test in their everyday lives. Data, feathers and tech innovation. The Pigeon Air Patrol.
So these IoT pigeons, as cool as this example is, this is what we would categorize as a win-neutral public-planet partnership, meaning it's good for us as humans. Nature isn't being harmed, but it's not really benefiting in any way. But it's just to give you an example. So we realize at public-planet partnerships that if we want more people to design these collaborations with nature. It's not going to be enough to just talk about it or share case studies. We need to design a methodology that is fun and engaging and accessible to anybody. How many of you have used the business model canvas? And how many of you have used an environmental framework? Yeah, like 0. Okay, maybe 3 people. How many of you have used an environmental framework that's fun? Okay. So what we tried to set out to do when we created these tools, and I'm going to give you a preview because these aren't public yet, is we really tried to keep that in mind and tried to create something that was fun and engaging that would eventually lead people through a process to design a public-planet partnership, whether you're a business or an NGO or a government. So we start with planet-centering tools, and these are tools that kind of help reconnect you with nature. So we have a few things like taking a wilderness walk blindfolded in nature and experiencing it with different senses, so the sights, the sounds, the smells, the touch. We have IoTree, which is reframing nature as technology, so that's inspired from the quote that I read you about trees. And then if anyone's done a diversity and inclusion workshop on dismantling your unconscious or your implicit biases, so we might have an implicit bias that women are not good at science or men are better than women at math, for example. So we have a tool that helps you dismantle your implicit biases of different animals and species. We have an ethical dialogue around should you partner with genetically modified mosquitoes to fight Zika? And the same way that you would map your human stakeholders, you also can map your non-human stakeholders like the insects and the ecosystems and habitats. So those of you who've done the business model canvas, do you remember the revenue models box? So you can experiment with different ways of making money. You can make money through subscriptions, through leasing, through franchising. So we kind of designed something similar. It's a deck of partnership model cards. So it's different ways you can partner with nature. So with the pigeon example, it's an example of partnering with nature as a sensor. With trees, it could be partnering with nature as a therapist. And then anyone who's married or in a relationship might recognize this. So the languages of love, the 5 languages of love, how can you best serve your partner? So this tool is all about how you discover what your natural partner needs. This isn't just about us taking from nature, it's also what we give in return. And then this was designed during the last season of Game of Thrones, so if there's any Game of Thrones fans, you might recognize where the name for this tool came from. So this is a matrix. When you have your public-planet partnership idea, you plot it on a matrix, and we're aiming for something that is regenerative for humans and regenerative for the planet. And then finally, we have some tools around actually writing your contract with nature and how you integrate the rights of nature into that contract. So if you're coming to the workshop, you'll get to experience a lot more of these tools, but I wanted to just give you a sense of the type of methodology that we're trying to create, and we're going to share this with the Nuqat community as well soon. But if there's one thing that I just want to leave you with, because I know sometimes the future can seem really daunting, but I'm also optimistic, and there is a future that is happening where we don't just see nature as this passive and weak stakeholder to be protected, but we really see nature as something to be respected and honored as an equal, and we completely redefine our interspecies relationships on this planet. And I would like to invite you to be a part of creating this new future and this new relationship that we have as an Earth community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leena. Just a reminder, your workshop is on the 24th of November on public-planet partnerships, along with your brother Tariq Olaimy.
Yeah.
Q&A. Questions over here? That was fascinating.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Do you think we need an economic reform to achieve the goals that you were talking about? Do you think a capitalist environment allows us to not exploit nature?
Sorry, can you just say that again?
The
I'm having trouble
capitalist
hearing.
environment does not allow us to exploit nature.
Yeah, like a capitalist environment or a capitalist economy, from what we see, depends on exploiting nature.
Yeah.
So do you think an economic reform is needed in order to change this?
Absolutely. So part of public-planet partnerships, and a huge part of it, I didn't talk about it too much because already this is a little out there and I don't want you to think I'm too hippie, you don't know me that well. But part of it is actually giving nature rights. So when you have an agreement, like if you have a public-private partnership, there's a company and a government, they decide we're going to work together, there has to be a win-win, and each side of the contract has rights. Until we have that with nature, where nature has its economic rights and economic independence, we will continue to exploit nature. So yes, I think economic reform is essential. And by the way, there are countries, I didn't talk about this, but there are countries that already, like in Ecuador, they've written nature's rights into the constitution. In New Zealand, there was a Maori tribe that fought for 100 years to have a river recognized as a person, because they were saying that this river is our ancestor, and they finally won about 2 years ago. Which, when you think in the US, corporations have personhood rights, it's not so crazy. So already there is a movement around nature's rights.
Question here.
Thank you so much for the beautiful presentation and introducing something I never heard about. I feel like with all the warning about the environment, we as people are still isolated on the facts and what's happening, because everybody lives in a house, the food doesn't come from nature, and they always think that it's not them. Like the amount of plastic that's wasted here, it's crazy. And talking from my point of view, only inside my home, I just drive me crazy. So how can we bring this here? Like, when I saw the pigeon, I was like, okay, finally they gave the pigeons like their rollback, and they're adding something. And then I thought about it, it will take another 10 years or 5 years to come to our region. We don't have time. So what can we do?
Come to the workshop.
That's a great one.
Well, we can't do it alone. So by the way, we're from Bahrain. So we created this in the region knowing that it would first gain traction probably internationally before we could start having more examples in the region. But what is encouraging is Dubai's Expo 2020 funded us, so we got an innovation grant from them, so they believe in the methodology, and they're committed to kind of helping us use Expo 2020 as a platform to publicize it. But I mean, like you said, we can't do it alone, so this is why we want to teach and spread this methodology. It's going to be open source. The more examples we have, it's kind of like a snowball effect. Once you have success stories from this region and people see, and unfortunately it is also about the money, so when people see the business case, then that's when you'll see other people replicating it. It's like entrepreneurship 10 years ago. There was very little entrepreneurship, and then it started mushrooming, and then Maktub was acquired by Yahoo, and now Kareem was acquired by Uber, and Souq was acquired by Amazon, and now you're starting to see success stories, so people are really, the movement is growing, and we need the same thing to happen. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Maybe one last question.
Here.
Yes, here.
So, are these methodologies specifically for designers, or can you teach the healthcare sector, the education sector, different ways that, the way we run the business in healthcare. I mean, I see a lot of ways where we're really impacting the environment very badly. So does it apply there too?
Absolutely. So this is, it's sector agnostic. When we designed the tools, we were really conscious of so we do have a scientist on our team, but we were really conscious that this would be something that was accessible to anybody, no matter what sector you were, whether you were in health, whether you were an urban planner, whether you're a designer, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're government. So it's really, it should be applicable to all sectors.
Thank you very much, Leena.
Thank you.